morning. Well, first of all, Shanette, thank you for that introduction and for the invitation, and to Secretary Perry for his insistence that I actually come out and spend some time with you. And you might be wondering, why is the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff the first keynote speaker at this particular group of people? And I will tell you, it's for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is there's a very special relationship between the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. I'll also tell you, and I'll refer to this in just a few minutes, the Department of Defense is also the largest institutional user of energy in the United States and quite possibly the world. So our partnership on innovation and pressing the edge of how much energy we can cram into a smaller and smaller space is incredibly important to the national security of our nation. But let me start by rewinding the clock to August of 1949. It was on the 29th of August 1949 that the then Soviet Union detonated their first nuclear device. They called it First Lightning. On the plains of Kazakhstan, they actually demonstrated to the United States that our lead in energy and nuclear technology wasn't going to be the guarantor of our national security. In fact, when they detonated their bomb, which was about the size of the Trinity weapon that was detonated out in the deserts of Nevada, they showed us that we were entering what we would learn would become a Cold War. A large power competition that persisted for nearly 40 years. And during those 40 years, our military literally redesigned itself several times to accommodate what we believed were the most serious risks to the security of our nation and to the security of the world. And we entered into a strategy of containment that tried to prevent the communist ideology of the Soviet Union from penetrating very far outside of the core of the Soviet Union. We thought up new concepts. We thought up new operational methodologies, new ways of organizing ourselves around the available weapons. We partnered with national labs to create new ways to employ our force. In fact, through the 70s and 80s, many of you will remember that we deployed things like stealth, long-range strike, deep sensors, and this whiz-bang thing we called the Global Positioning System. And it was the combination of all those technologies, of looking deep into the enemy's reinforcements, of looking at their logistics trains, of being able to predict how much force would be required to defeat that incoming force, that allowed us to tailor what we call the Joint Force, our Navy, Air Force, Army, and Marine Corps, to reach deep behind enemy lines and defeat them before they could defeat us. And as a consequence, we never actually went to war with the Soviet Union. There was a piece of all of that organizational work that rested in the background that talked about the logistics of deploying force. And you heard in the introduction that I was the commander of Air Mobility Command and U.S. Transportation Command. It was my job to understand how to support and deploy forces to every corner of the world. And I will tell you that for the better part of the last 2 decades, our ability to deploy and employ force at the place and time of our choosing was literally uncontested. Our most humbling experience was actually attempting to supply our forward forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that logistics was challenged not by the distance and the time, but by harassing attacks of roadside bombs that we called improvised explosive devices. And the terrorists who perpetrated those attacks never really got the upper hand because we could simply overwhelm them with mass. So 4 years ago, when I testified for my first confirmation hearing as the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I was asked, what do I believe the most significant threats to the national security of the United States are? And I answered, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and violent extremism. And 6 weeks later, when General Dunford testified for his confirmation, unrehearsed and uncoordinated, he gave the same answer. We were actually challenged by the members of the committee. How can that be when we're in a fight in Afghanistan and Iraq against violent extremists today? And my answer was simple. Violent extremists are a challenge that we are going to have to confront, but they do not have the capacity to present an existential threat to the existence of our nation. Russia and China do. Iran and North Korea aspire to the same. And so we have entered an era of great power competition. And I would argue we have re-entered that era of great power competition, because that's what we faced when we faced the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And what that great power competition means is that every domain that we operate in is a potential area of conflict or competition. And I do mean every domain: air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. Our information technologies and our energy technologies are challenged in that same way. And so there are serious risks to our ability to deploy and employ force. I told you that the Defense Department is the largest single consumer of energy in the United States. Last year, we consumed 8.5 million barrels of fuel to power our ships and our aircraft. Now, I know in Denver, we would be loath to use a Dallas Cowboys analogy, but that would be the AT&T Stadium filled floor to ceiling 4.5 times. That's how much fuel we use just to move the things that must move. Across the world, we spend an additional $3.5 billion on the energy to power 500 installations that are distributed across the entire planet. A $10 shift in the cost of oil represents a $1 billion shift in our energy bill. And so, yes, the department does pay attention. Our force does pay attention to the security of the energy markets. I talked about the supply chains that actually allow us to deploy our forces forward. The ability to move fuel to the forward edge of the battle space is an absolute requirement. It costs us almost 1.5 gallons of fuel to move 1 gallon of fuel to the forward edge of the battle space. That means the equipment that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are using as far forward as we can possibly move them come at a significant energy premium. And so that implies that we ought to be working together. It implies that this partnership between industry, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Defense goes much deeper than the fact that the Department of Energy designs and builds some of the weapons that we employ. It goes much deeper than the fact that the Department of Energy secures the nuclear energy supply that powers our nuclear submarines and our nuclear aircraft carriers and provides our capacity to build and deploy nuclear weapons now and into the future. What it implies is that everything from the batteries that our soldiers carry to the security of the networks that supply the power to our installations, to our ability to secure the petroleum and petroleum byproduct infrastructure that allows us to fuel our ships, trucks, and aircraft, is integral to our national security. And so every innovation that industry can bring to stabilizing the energy markets and stabilizing energy technologies benefits our national security. So what are we doing to try and help? So the department isn't standing still, the joint force is not standing still. In fact, this year we will run a series of war games and exercises that focus on the logistics and supply chains that make the defense of this nation possible. Not the weapons, not the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, not the weapons systems, but the actual network and infrastructure that allows us to move all of the equipment, all of those young men and women, and all of their tools forward and supply them with the energy and the resources that they need to prevail in conflict. And those exercises have already led us to a whole variety of things inside the department that we can do better. Some involve our combat force and some don't. And I'll give you a handful of examples. We're upgrading and procuring new equipment. Why is that important? Newer equipment has a lower energy footprint. A lower energy footprint means I have to push less fuel or energy forward. And when I say energy, I mean everything from batteries to fuel. In fact, I was talking to Lane before I came on stage. Yesterday, I was walking down a sidewalk on Fort Myer, and I saw a young soldier who was out for his Sunday afternoon walk in uniform, carrying his rucksack. And I was a curious sort, so I walked up to him and I said, "So how much does your pack weigh?" "Well, sir, we call them rucksacks." "Yes, I get that." "How much does it weigh?" 50 pounds. "What's in it?" "Well, my basic kit, no combat gear, no radios, no sensors, no night vision goggles, no batteries, no ammo, no weapon." 50 pounds. That's just what it takes to get him out the door. Everything else is extra. So every bit of effort we can put into increasing the amount of energy per pound carried makes a difference to the survival of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in the field. We've done some things you would expect us to do: high energy heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, reducing the demand for power in our installations, installing solar, taking advantage of wind power. We've even started reducing the weight of our aircraft by using lightweight parts, some of which are 3D printed using technologies invented in your laboratories. We will do anything it takes to reduce the energy footprint of the force to make those young men and women who depend on us successful. And that really is why we're here. That's really why I'm on stage today. So what do we need from you? Well, we need energy technologies that reduce the risks to our current force. If I knew what all of those were, I would tell you. I just know how to ask for them. I can imagine things like microreactors or modular nuclear reactors that could power our bases and give them a reliable source of power in crisis and in peacetime. I could talk about resilient energy networks that let us have confidence that we can depend on the commercial providers of the energy that power our installations. I could talk about lightweight batteries. I could talk about the density of energy per pound carried, but those would be redundant. What we need from you is the ability to bring those technologies in at scale. There is nothing small about the Department of Defense. And when we deploy, there's nothing small about the scale of that deployment. And so any energy innovation that we bring into this enterprise has to be done almost immediately at scale. And so those are the kinds of demands that I would put on the physicists and the engineers and the network analysts and the computer scientists in this room. Help us be better at what we do. Help us reduce that requirement for putting energy at the forward edge of the battle space to something less than 1.4 to 1. Help me reduce the weight of that soldier's backpack to something less than half of his body weight or her body weight. I'm a backpacker. If my pack weighs more than 30 pounds, I'm grumpy and miserable all day. And that includes food, water, and all of my toys. That young man was carrying almost twice what I'm willing to carry when I go out and recreationally backpack. He deserves better than that. Our team deserves better than that. So I'm going to tell you that my time is limited. I'm down to about 10 seconds on the clock and about 22 days in uniform. I'm exceedingly proud of the young men and women who have chosen to defend this nation. There are 2 million of them who wear a uniform like this to work every day, to defend freedom and liberty for all of us. And they deserve the best that we can provide for them. Albert Einstein once said, "There's no greater satisfaction for a just and well-meaning person than the knowledge that he has devoted his best energies to the service of a good cause." I will tell you that the partnership between DOE and the Department of Defense is work in the service of a good cause, because it would work in the service of defense of your freedom and your liberty. And I'm proud to have been able to wear this uniform and represent all of the young men and women who serve this nation today and will serve it in the future. And I know they're in good hands because they're in your hands. Because you collectively are going to use your knowledge and your experience to deliver the tools that they need, not only in the field but at home, to make our economy strong and resilient, to make our nation strong and resilient, and to make sure that energy won't be the reason that we call on those young men and women to go forward and defend this nation in a conflict. God bless you all. Thank you for what you do, and good luck.